Hi everyone, it's Ellie Marie King, and I am here to read Not a Dream, Chapter 9. So let's get started and see what happens next. Chapter 9, Divided. That morning, Helen found her tree to sleep by and wearily leaned against it. She was so tired. She was tired of John and Burke arguing, tired of not knowing who she could trust, tired of sleeping on the ground. The stress that she was taking in was much worse than what her own mother had ever dished out before. Under orders from Helen, Burke was to sleep all by himself on one side of the camp and John on the other. Unfortunately, John was closer to Helen, so when she laid down by the tree, he scooted closer and began to whisper to her. Is it because he's better at things than me? Is that why people always take his side? John asked her. Or does he hold some sort of power over everyone else? John, Helen said tiredly, not even bothering to open her eyes. Maybe people like your brother more, because all you do is look at his good qualities. Maybe it's time you started looking at yourself instead of at your brother. How can I look at myself? I have no mirror, John protested. Helen propped herself up with her elbows and looked at John with true loathing. It's a figurative form of speaking. It means to look at your own attributes instead of complaining about his. She fought to keep her voice even, but she was just so tired. All she wanted was rest. You have any siblings, Helen? John asked, shrugging what she said off. No. Helen lowered herself back down to the ground. I'm an only child. Why do you want to know? I was curious as to how you could understand how to treat a sibling. John poked at her last nerve with a very sharp stick that was about to be broken into pieces. John? Helen started exasperatedly. I don't understand siblings, but what I do understand is that people would look at you better if you were to start being your own person and not to care what others think of your brother. Now, would you please go to sleep? I just don't understand how you can take his side on this still, John said, crossing his arms like a scolded child. John! Helen roared, getting Burke's attention. She was sitting up and gripping the man's shoulders, looking directly into his mud-brown eyes with a look of death on her face. I just want to rest. I am tired of traveling with you and Burke. The two of you are the worst at bickering than anyone. I know twin sisters that bicker less than the two of you. Now shut up and go to sleep. For a moment, the two men just stared at her. They looked at each other and then at her again. Helen then stood up and went further in between the two. So, what is it about my brother that drives you the craziest? Burke was now talking to her. The fact that you both can't stop talking about each other all day and yet still find time to argue and stop me from resting. Helen said tiredly. Her eyes were closed again. Please, just let me sleep, she pleaded with spirit. I'm so tired, and I assure you I will be a much pleasanter person after a good day's rest. If that's what you want. Burke shrugged and turned away. He was sitting cross-legged, staring off toward their next destination. Maybe he should stop being Mr. Know-It-All. Every day he tells me that I'm doing something wrong. It's the most irritating thing in the world. Helen chose not to answer. She was hoping by staying quiet that he wouldn't continue to talk. The most annoying thing about Burke is that he thinks he knows everything. John was now closer to her again. He tries to do something that he thinks is significant, but he always screws it up. Again, Helen remained silent, hoping that the two brothers would leave her alone. Her wish was granted, but she should have wished for peace. Maybe you should let me make mistakes, and then I can learn from them. Burke pouted. I don't think you could learn anything from your mistakes, John said with his arms crossed over his chest. Your brain lacks the capacity. You think you're so special just because you're older than me, Burke growled. Ugh! Helen sat up, ready to kill the two men who looked at her in fear. Did you ever think that your parents loved the two of you equally? Burke is the baby and is supposed to be protected by his mother. John is the eldest. Your parents look to him to show Burke what's right from wrong. Burke, you're jealous of John because he has so much freedom. And John, you're jealous of Burke because he gets babied and doesn't have to do as much as you do. Ugh! John looked away from his arms, still crossed over his chest. You don't have siblings, so how could you possibly understand? Because my best friend is a middle child in a family and has to deal with a younger and older sibling. I don't care about your problems, but unfortunately it seems that they are keeping me awake, and I don't much like this. I'll explain to them. So, here's the deal. We're all going to try to get along and stop arguing with one another until this journey is over, and I do not want to hear another peep about who is liked the most out of the both of you. But, John began, I don't care. Just keep it to yourself. Helen cut him off. Now, we have a long day ahead of us, so would the two of you please just go to sleep? Fine, Burke said, turning his back to the two humans. I don't see why you're judging us when you made your spirits go to sleep. All right. John walked past where Helen was sleeping and laid down where he originally had been sitting. I just wish I understood. It is all. After that, the camp was quiet and everyone was allowed to sleep. Burke stayed awake to keep watch, and right before night fell around them, Burke went inside John's side to sleep for the night. The journey started out a very quiet one. John, Helen murmured her companion's name. Yes? He looked over at her. I think that you shouldn't worry so much about your brother. I'm sure you have a lot of great qualities considering you were a blacksmith before this, Helen answered with a smile on her face. You're certainly chipper tonight, John said gloomily. I just wanted some rest, but I would like to know more about this place, Helen answered him, letting the subject of him and his brother die. Like what? John asked. He was now only looking ahead of him. Like, why are there humans and creatures? It's just not very consistent, Helen answered. She had a plethora of questions to ask, and was sure the walk was long enough to get all of her answers. The big man that did this to us could not change everyone as he wanted them to be, John answered. He wanted all of us to be mindless zombies when he began his work, but unfortunately his plan went awry and got away from him. We were all changed to fit what we were compatible with. Those of us who were close with someone who changed into a spirit carrier if that person died in the transforming stage. Those with bad tempers were turned into werewolves, and so on and so forth. We don't really need to talk about this. Why is it that no one likes to talk about the person that did this to you guys? Helen knew nothing about the man except for he had cursed the world somehow. It's because he's always watching and waiting to strike, John answered, looking about. He knows what's going on around us every hour of every day. I doubt he's really all that powerful, Helen said, brushing it off. If he's not watching us, his messengers are, John continued. You met them. They were handpicked by the man who did this to us. You must be pretty crazy and stupid to be going up against him. What's that supposed to mean? Helen put her hands on her hips. It means that you're trying to stop the man from cursing this world. He is going to be watching you like there's no tomorrow. John explained. He looked terrified to be talking about the subject. Who are the messengers? Helen asked John. She had no idea as to who they could be, but she just wanted to be sure. They're the ones that work under Troy the vampire. Troy is the reason this whole mess started, John said, looking about in the night. How did he start this? Helen looked in the same direction he was watching and confused. He was the conductor. That made it possible for the big man to curse everyone. The big man can't curse anyone unless he has a conductor to do it with. And when this happens, time stands still for everyone in the world. That sounds unfair for the people who live here. Helen looked up at the sky. You know that voice you sometimes hear in your head? John asked her. Voice? What voice? Helen tried to pretend she didn't know what he was talking about. John just gave her an irritated look. I don't want to sound crazy, but yeah, there's a voice in my head. The voice is a big man trying to make you miserable. It's his own personal game that he came up with not too long ago, John told her confidently. You can't mess with your head. He can't mess with your head if you die, or if you have a spirit banging around in your noggin. So that's what that is? I can't believe it. Helen shivered. That's really weird. It can't be helped. He does what he wants, John said with a shrug. Can he read your mind too? Helen was thoroughly freaked out about having a man poking around in her head. No, he can only speak things to you to make you want to die or even not want to complete your quest. It's all up to you to keep going, because once you cave to his will, you will never be the same again. They walked in a companionable silence for a little while until they entered a forest. It was getting close for the sun to come up. The two were still silent until they were walking for a couple more hours. How does your friend cope with being the middle child? John finally asked Helen. It had been on his mind for some time now. Easily. She just lives her life the way she chooses and doesn't let the fact that she's in the middle bother her, Helen answered. She is her own person, after all. I think it's time that I matured a little, John told her. You were right when you said we argue too much. I just get so angry so easily. It's okay to get upset, but you can't let little things bother you, Helen said with a smirk. You don't smile much, do you? John asked her. Helen blinked at him. No, not really. Why do you ask? She asked the man. Because when you smile, it looks so awkward, almost like you don't know how to move your mouth into that certain formation. You naturally frown, too, John said thoughtfully. Do you watch my mouth or something when you look at me? Helen asked him. No, I just noticed this all. John blushed and looked away. Maybe we should get ready to rest for the day. It's getting light out. If that's what you want, Helen said with a sigh. She found a tree and lay down. The morning was a quiet one as John went to sleep just before she did. Okay, well that's the end of chapter 9. As always, I will leave the links in the description below for the book if anyone's interested in buying it. But anyway, hopefully I will see you guys next time. Bye!